Welcome to a wonderfully wet, damp Burgundy with Tweedy. Hopefully you can get a bit of a sense of the rain. Very, very glad I've got this tarp. New tweed suit, just been to pick that up from Walker Slater earlier today. And while I was in that part of town, I popped into a branch of El Vino. These are a few wine bars in the sort of city of London that I think are now part of Davies, the Davies wine bar chain. And Davies also do retail sales, off sales. I think I've managed to spoil the label in the rain. Oh, it's going to get even wetter poking out from under the tarp there. This was from the branch of El Vino, which is very close to Blackfriars. There's another one on Fleet Street just around the corner. I don't know why they have two so close to each other. This is a 2016 Gevrey Chambertin from Domaine Tortochot, who I have featured I think a couple of times before. Quite like this producer, Tortochot, and it's a 1er Cru. It's from Les Champeaux, which perhaps by some magic I can put a map on my old Gevrey Chambertin map and show you exactly where in Gevrey Chambertin that is. Generally I find when going into a wine bar that also does off sales on the side, the prices aren't great. I was pleasantly surprised with this. The usual caveat that I expect all Gevrey Chambertin to be an absolute minimum of 50-60 quid, and most shops in London it's hard to walk into a lot of especially slightly higher end wine shops in London and find anything in that kind of price bracket. If they have any Gevrey Chambertin at all, you'd be looking at a bit higher than that. But this is a 1er Cru as well, so I expect that to be a step up price wise, a significant step up price wise. You could easily spend £100 plus on 1er Cru Gevrey Chambertin, depending on the producer, the vintage, and so on. But this, I believe, was £76. Usual caveats, by any normal standards, that seems like a very expensive bottle of wine. But within the twisted reality that is Burgundy, particularly Gevrey Chambertin, and particularly a 1er Cru from one of the, not the absolute best group of vineyards, but the second tier of best vineyards, I thought that was a pretty good price for a vintage 2016 that almost certainly will be ready now. The slight wrinkle is I don't remember the 2016 being a particularly great vintage. As with all these things, it depends on the producer whether they were able to get the best out of a bad lot. I have a vague feeling it was rainy as a vintage. I don't remember the specifics of the vintage report. Perhaps appropriate to be drinking it on a day like today. From other producers and other villagers, I have actually had some decent 2016s. They've perhaps taken a bit longer to sort of come to their own, but this has had a good 8 years practically now since these grapes would have come off the vine. So I like the producer. I'm hoping this might actually be okay. I don't have my walking boots with me today, so I'm going to have to be extra careful to not knock this over, especially as I'm wearing a new suit, which is fairly pale coloured. Usual challenging lighting conditions in between rain showers and under a tarp. So that's sort of towards the darker end, not very, very dark, but dark-ish. And it is starting with a nice, dense, possibly slightly liqueur-y, but possibly just really condensed cherry aroma. I feel like I get something floral, and I'm pretty sure we're more in the rose sort of department here. And something slightly woody, but not in a Subois forest floor sort of woody way, more in a polished hardwood furniture sort of way. Quite a nice woody aroma actually. On the palate, nicely condensed. A lot of acidity there. Interesting. Not overwhelmingly so. I don't think I'm finding that too much. But there's a definite freshness, I suppose, is usually the way people tend to express acidity. More fruit there, again, mainly getting cherries, I think. A tiny hint of that slight greenness you get in a wine that is maybe a little bit too young. I wonder if that might be one of those signs of 2016 being that, I may be completely misquoting this, but I've a feeling it was a damp year. Despite that initial sort of concentration, perhaps there is a little bit of a hint of grapes that haven't been at their absolute most perfect ripeness there. Coming back to the nose again, I get a sort of slight sense of wild cherry. Not that that's something you eat, and I'm not even really sure I know what the aroma of wild cherry is, but I say that partly because I think again there is this sort of slight greenness, which is not actually unpleasant here on the nose, but there is a kind of something slightly vegetal or slightly leafy there, which I don't mind, but it's not the sort of straightforward, pure, rich cherry that I've had in some other Gevrey Chambertins of late. A bit more wild. I've got a feeling this might be a possibly an organic producer, I can't remember. There are some slightly rustic, countryside-y, green edges to this, but I actually kind of like that. It's a bit different, and somehow it really seems to suit this weather, the rain, sitting under a tarp here in the woods. I wonder if I might have mischaracterised this, or that talk of it being very green and rustic and organic. Maybe that was partly environmental, I'm not sure, but it is developing in an interesting way. And I'm not getting so much of that greenness and rusticity. I don't think that's a word, is it? If it is, I don't like it. Regaining a bit of refinement. Not that there was anything wrong with the rustic side of it, but I don't know, somehow that seems incongruous with a 1er Cru Gevrey Chambertin. Might be worth mentioning that, you know, I just picked this up today, hours ago, and it was right behind the bar, presumably at very much room temperature, and may have been there for some time. So during the course of the time that I've been sat out here in the damp, slightly chilly woods, I'm very happy. I'm wearing tweed. My phone is telling me the temperature outside at the moment is 13 degrees Celsius, which is, you know, some people would probably find reasonably chilly. And that's more or less cellar temperature as it happens, perhaps the higher end of the cellar temperature range. The bottle feels pleasantly cool now. It is down to the sort of range of temperature it would be had I just yanked this out of my cellar. Whether it's the temperature change or some other factor, just airing probably. I'm finding it a little bit more sort of elegant, sort of cool and sophisticated. In particular, there is a nice minerality that is starting to develop and has a fruity character that I've encountered several times before that I never really seem to be able to adequately describe. It is kind of grapey, but it's also dark plums, I suppose a bit of dark cherry. This is more on the palate I'm talking now rather than on the nose. Quite a refined, fruity sort of character, and I really like that. I wish I had a good word for that. There's a little bit of savouriness. There's still nice concentration. It's not sort of thick and rich again like some of those previous Gevrey Chambertins I've had recently, but it is quite concentrated. There is definitely something sort of, I don't know, is green the wrong word? I don't know. Perhaps that's being unfair. Green sounds like a criticism, doesn't it, of wine? It sounds like it's underripe. There is something leafy and natural about it, but there's also something quite condensed, quite concentrated, quite mineral, almost a little bit savoury. I think that is plummy actually. There is some slightly kind of plum sauce, a tiny bit. It's light and it's delicate, but there is a little bit of that kind of Chinese plum sauce sort of character to it. This video has gone on far too long, so I feel like I need to come to some kind of conclusion. One last slurp-et. There probably is more fruit there than just cherry to begin with. That's maybe an oversimplification of the fruit character, but it is a very nice nose. Like I said earlier, a little bit of rose. I'm tempted to veer rose hip because that would chime with that slightly sort of rustic vibe that I was talking about earlier. That's like greenness. I still can't get away from it. The tiny hint of sort of leafiness to it as well on the nose. Lovely now on the palate with that extra bit of airing. Again, they're much more fruit character than just cherry. I think I'm getting, go for the usual roster, bit of blackberry maybe on the palate perhaps. David keeps talking of loganberry. I'm still not quite sure what loganberry actually tastes like, but that seems like a very plausible candidate for some of that extra fruit character. And plum and grapes, ridiculous as that always sounds. And I'm enjoying it more, whether it's the airing or whether it's the slightly cooler temperature it is at now, more like cellar temperature. I'm definitely enjoying it more now. That mineral character is starting to emerge, and it's not quite as green and rustic as it was originally. I think perhaps that was slightly unfair or inaccurate, I should say. That's been lovely. Really enjoyed that. I think it may be at least partly down to the setting. I'm sure there's a lot of it that is down to the setting, but you know, in this particular environment, no corkage, the world's best wine bar. It's called Nature. I've enjoyed that very much. So I'll shut up now, stop talking, because most of this is probably irrelevant. Cheers.